Perfect. We have almost 60 people on the call, so I think it's the right moment to go. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniel Eischen. I'm chairman of the British Chamber of Commerce for Luxembourg, and I would like to welcome you to this, what I'm sure is going to be a very, very interesting call today in our BCC live events. So just looking at the prestigious names of our two speakers, their extensive knowledge and experience, I am really convinced that we're going to get out of this webinar today with lots of helpful and interesting insights. We're a little bit more than 150 days into the new year. I think you will all agree with me that the year has not really gone as we probably had planned when we started this a couple of months ago. So for all of us, we had to do changes. Here at the British Chamber of Commerce, we're really happy to have started organizing these virtual events, these webinars, BCC Live, which are very successful. And it's, of course, because of you, because you constantly log in and participate in the events we have. So thank you very much to all of you for taking the time to be together with us. 150 days, which means we'll have, if you saw the title of the event, Getting Brexit Done, we have fewer than 200 days remaining until the end of the transition period. So time is running fast now. With the time that still remains. So it's going to be interesting to see what we can expect from the Brexit process in the days to come. I would like to thank very much Steve Jacobi and Clifford Chance. And Steve, I would like to invite you on stage. If you could switch on your camera. So Steve is going to be moderating this afternoon this event. Steve Jacobi is managing partner from Clifford Chance here in Luxembourg. And Steve is at the initiative of these events. So we also, together with the British Chamber of Commerce team, helped organize this and convince the speakers to be part of this. So thank you very much, Steve. Thank you very much to Clifford Chance for supporting us in this event today. And I would like immediately to hand over to you so you can introduce our two speakers. Thanks again to everyone and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Dan, and welcome everyone to this webinar. A few words of introduction before I hand over to our distinguished speakers who will take you through through those 200 days and what may happen then. One could be forgiven to have forgotten Brexit over the last months as Europe and the world was preoccupied with a global pandemic, sanitary crisis, and will now be dealing with the economic impact of an unprecedented scale in recent history of that pandemic. And while the UK and the EU delegations have completed now, as of last week, the fourth round of their talks on the future relationship between the United Kingdom and the EU, it seems, from what we know, that little progress has been made. This is despite, as the chair has already mentioned, that the clock is ticking. Around 20 days left before the end of the June deadline for the possible request of an extension of the transition period and the possible grant thereof. And should there be no extension, around 200 days until the end of the transition period provided for in the Withdrawal Agreement, and the end of the time when the UK will be not only cease to be an EU member state, but cease to be treated as an EU member state. And unsurprisingly, over the last weeks, and particularly this week, we have seen that the media has been focusing again on the next cliff edge scenario of the Brexit saga. So it did seem like an opportune time to take stock of where we are and look at how the process leading to getting Brexit done could unfold over the next 200 days. While neither of our panelists obviously have a crystal ball, they are very experienced in the workings of EU institutions and international negotiations. I'm very fortunate to have them with us today to provide their insight in the current situation. Luc Frieden, partner at Elvinger Hoss and chairman of the Chamber of Commerce, as well as former Luxembourg Minister of Finance for many years, who has seen many complex negotiations at a new level and can share his views on the current ones. Michel Petite, my colleague from the Clifford Chance Paris office, where he's an off-counsel, had a distinguished career in the EU institutions, serving several presidents of the Commission, and several presidents of the Commission, and in particular was a director of the legal services of the European Commission until 2007, and he participated in those functions in all institutional reforms, the treaties of Maastricht, Amsterdam, Nice, and Lisbon. So I would invite Luc and Michel on stage, for the questions. I will be leading into the debate with the first question, and then I'm sure the two of them will take it from there and provide you with all the insights. So, Luc, Michel, Brexit, first of all, in the broader geopolitical and economic context, what do you think will be the result of Brexit? Will it weaken the EU? Will it reinforce the EU? What does it mean for the UK-US relationship? Are we moving to a multipolar world, or are we moving to greater cooperation? Over to you.
Well, hello, Steve. Thank you, and hello to everybody. These are a lot of questions that you put to us at the same time. I think we should not forget that Brexit already took place. The United Kingdom left already the European Union, and nobody noticed it really, because all the rules, as you just said, are still the same in the United Kingdom, are the same in the relationship to the European Union, except that the United Kingdom is no longer sitting at the table of the European institutions where decisions are being made for the entire European Union. We also should not forget that the decision on whether or not to leave the European Union was taken by the British people 4 years ago, exactly 4 years ago. It was in June 2016, and the environment in 2016 was a completely different environment than we have today. The GDP of the European Union and of the United Kingdom was stronger. Since then, the GDP decreased in the United Kingdom. It had a little bit different evolution in the rest of the European Union. And we should also not forget that since 2016, or even since the beginning of this year, the European Union has continued to function quite well. You know, there were European elections in which the United Kingdom did not participate. The parties that have the majority in the European Parliament are pro-European parties in their vast majority. And the European Union continues to move ahead in a further integration. It's sometimes a difficult move ahead, but Europe is moving ahead. And I think, therefore, the European Union will be stronger even now, because there are so many issues, including the current crisis, that request from all of the European countries to work together. It should also not be forgotten that the United Kingdom was always a very difficult member of the European Union. You know, it was not a member of the Eurozone, it was not a member of the Schengen Agreement, it had a number of opt-outs and opt-ins in the treaty, in particular with regard to justice and home affairs. So while the UK will remain in the geographical space of Europe, the fact that the UK left in January the European Union, and that it will leave even more at the beginning of next year, will not weaken the European Union. I would add two more things. What also has changed is that since 2016, the United States has become much more unpredictable. I think the Trump administration does not make it easy for Europeans, and also not for the United Kingdom, to know exactly where they move on international issues. And China, the other big player, has become much more assertive, more proud, and made huge progress in becoming a high-tech nation, moving from rather manufacturing country to a high-tech economy with clearly an ambition to play a role on the world stage. And so in all this, you know, Brexit is an issue that we almost forgot, and that now comes back on our agenda, because we need to find some kind of a relationship with the United Kingdom before the end of the year. But Europe, certainly, to answer your first question, did not become less strong. On the contrary, I think Europe needs quickly to move ahead to solve this economic crisis and to be a player on the world economic and political stage.
Michel, do you want to react to this?
Yes, well, I can only agree with all of what Luc just said. I think if your question was, what does this imply on the world scene geopolitically, indeed, the fact that we are 200 days away from the end of the transition period doesn't make any difference. Brexit has happened, as Luc just mentioned. From a geopolitical point of view, there are only a few probable elements. First, UK will make a point to add a separate and autonomous voice to the one of the EU. As Luc recalled, it was always the case. But again, from a geopolitical point of view, most member states have their own sort of spectrum of influence, and that's one of the charms of Europe. France, Germany, Italy, Spain, each have their own interests, but of course, when it is backed up by a European political joint position, that is the added value. So where will UK position go? To a certain extent, it will depend on the content of the agreement with the European Union. Will it be a kind of hostile separation, or will it be a sort of warm and close alignment of two separate autonomous entities? That probably depends on the content of the agreement, and that will send us to where the present process goes. Certainly, in political terms, Brexit will weaken the European Union on one side, because UK was and is an indisputable world-class operator. It will dilute the European Union voice where there was or where there is one. And also, it will add another actor for the US and China to play with on the global scene. I mean, all these are probably elements of weakening the European Union. On the other hand, the EU could benefit by reinforcing itself, because the United Kingdom was always, I wouldn't say the one which did not allow an ever closer union to happen, but which was always resisting it. And in a way, this is an opportunity for the European Union to actually go forward and get more and more integrated. If that happens, UK will find itself in the sort of historic nightmare of its predecessor governments for centuries. It will be on its own, facing a more unified continent. And from a strategic point of view, this must be a question already in the UK. But maybe this is purely history overtaken by the globalization of world. But indeed, that is going to be entirely new. I should stop there, I think, and send back to you, Steve, for the follow-up.
May I just, Michel, while I agree with most of what you said, I think we should not forget that in the international economy, the United Kingdom represents approximately 3% of GDP. And in order to play a major role, I think that will be much more difficult to do that on its own than being part of the European Union, in particular when it comes to negotiating free trade agreements. I think the United States, as we all know, have elections later this year, presidential elections. So I'm not sure whether the United Kingdom can easily get ambitious free trade agreement with the United States. So I think in the world of tomorrow, there will be three blocks that will dominate the world stage. That is the United States, that is China, and that is the European Union. And for the United Kingdom, it will be a huge challenge to find its own role. Now, I think that, of course, you can be successful and happy outside of the European Union, but let us not forget that the European Union has a bargaining power when it comes to negotiating with third countries that the United Kingdom may not have. And on the relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union, of course, we have to find a way to do that. And I think we will talk about this during this webinar. But one thing is sure, that the United Kingdom has left, as we both said, the European Union. And if you leave, you cannot be treated in the same way than if you are a full member. So Brexit means Brexit. Out is out. And therefore the question is, how do we treat the United Kingdom, we as the European Union and as member states of the European Union, how do we treat the United Kingdom in relation to other third countries that are also either on our continent or outside? And I think that's a big challenge for the European Union. Even if we all agree, I think we as persons and our countries agree that we should have a friendly and close relationship with the United Kingdom also in the future, because we are neighbors, we have a common history, and we have also a common future.
Yes,
maybe
shall I?
Please go ahead, Michel.
Just a short word. I think that's absolutely right. I mean, Luc has now moved on the economic front, which is extremely important geopolitically. It's one of the sort of very strong elements. But of course, the UK character on the world scene goes slightly beyond pure economy. They see themselves as a sort of global voice, probably partly from a historical point of view, but also as a major actor in any conflict around the world at present. But from an economic point of view, Luc is entirely right. Although Brexit will mean a kind of reduction of the internal market in terms of size, UK is a big economy, which will sort of probably progressively diverge from our system, and new barriers are going to be erected between UK and the European Union. All this will have a cost, and in a way, it's not very good for either, but probably worse indeed for the United Kingdom. On trade internationally, this is a fairly open question. Will UK help in opposing the destruction of the multilateral system of trade, which is so aptly performed by the United States, or at least by the present United States? So will UK remain a sort of active promoter of multilateral, or owing to urgency and pressure, will it seek at all costs bilateral trade agreements, as it seems to be doing at present with the US, with Japan? And I fully agree with Luc, they will find it very difficult to actually get good agreements with first-class world operators, which already have major agreement with the European Union. It's not the case for the US, but for all the others. And all the others are basically waiting for what will happen next before they actually engage with the United Kingdom. All this will have an effect on the UK-EU relationship, which is sort of unfolding at present. But UK is not in a very good position for these trade agreements. I fully agree with Luc.
Well, maybe conscious of time, and I think we could listen to you for much longer on this topic, but can we move on maybe to the process ahead? I think we've mentioned that several times already. There is a lot of events that will now be unfolding, and there are probably different routes to the end of the year and what could happen. So I would like to ask both of you to reflect on where do you think, what is going to happen next? And as I said in my introduction, you don't have a crystal ball, but we want to do precisely a bit of crystal ball gazing with you.
Should I try first? I brought my crystal ball. I think that the United Kingdom will not ask for an extension of the transition period, because the extension will not help to make progress in these negotiations. Let us not forget, as I said at the beginning of this webinar, the referendum took place 4 years ago. All the cards are on the table, and I think it requires political will and compromise to come to an agreement. I think it's not that difficult to achieve an agreement within 6 months, although I do realize that there are many areas that need to be covered, but it depends to a large extent in what detail you go in these agreements, or whether you copy already existing agreements, or whether you write something completely new. So technically and politically, it is feasible, but of course, COVID certainly had an impact on this, because Michel and I know from many negotiations in Brussels in our past careers that a lot happens in the margins of the meetings, and all this, of course, is much more difficult if you do that by video conferences. So I think it is feasible. I think there will be no extension, but again, the United Kingdom must realize that being outside of the European Union does not mean the same than being inside. And the European Union, you know, it's a complex structure, because Michel Barnier is not negotiating in his own name. He's negotiating on behalf of 27 member states. And obviously, on many of these questions, he has to go back to the member states to clarify the mandate that he has received. So I think a deal is possible before the end of the year, but time is extremely short. And if a deal comes out, I think it will either be a copy of already existing agreements in place, Canada and something like that, or more or less a framework agreement where details have to be worked out afterwards.
Thank you, Luc. So Michel, does your crystal ball tell us the same thing?
Well, I'm not sure. I think my crystal ball is more pessimistic. To a large extent, I mean, what we've seen since the Boris Johnson government is in place is a negotiation which goes round in circle, with huge gaps between the two mandates given to the UK government on the one side and to Michel Barnier by the 27 member states on the other. And in a way, what I've seen being built in the past 4 rounds of this year is a sort of incompatible logic between the two sides. And on several issues, the major ones being, I think, that the ideal agreed by both sides of no quota, no tariff, in the EU mind is not attainable without strong level playing commitments. In other words, in order to have guarantees that there will be no social dumping, environmental dumping, or competition dumping in the area of state aids in particular. But UK is not engaging in this debate. They resist going anywhere down that road by basically saying we precisely are out, and that is what we wanted, to be able to diverge at any point and for any distance. The other huge gap is on the concept of the agreement. The EU wishes to have one broad agreement and one sort of governance of this agreement in one sort of a body of treaty. The UK is going for a series of sectorial agreements, and we've seen that in the European Union in the past with Switzerland, and nobody wants to have it again because it equals to pick and choose. You would have an agreement in those areas which please UK and no agreement in the others, and that is clearly also unacceptable. Each of these sectors would have its own system of governance, and that is not the way the EU normally deals with agreements. So for just these two reasons, and I leave aside fisheries because that's a detail in a way, it's very sensitive politically for some member states, but that can be solved. But these are the sort of fundamental gaps are really on incompatible logic. And my fear is that, and we know that out of Brussels now, the general feeling, and many capitals are thinking that in practice, UK has already calculated that to have a sort of very low ambitious agreement or to have no deal at all doesn't make that difference. They have issued now their own tariff if it goes no deal and on WTO rules by default. And indeed, the result is not so huge of a difference between a sort of low-key agreement with tariffs on many issues. And in a way, there is the feeling, I think, which is developing fast, that UK is already in the conclusion that it's not worth to make a political move, which would be very difficult for them internally. And in a way, that they have already sort of digested the fact that there may well be no deal, and that maybe it's not such a disaster for them. So on the EU side, I think the feeling of frustration is now, is now deriving from that feeling that this might be the conclusion already taken by UK. And indeed, if nothing much happens in the next meeting between Boris Johnson and the President of the Commission, very soon, I think everyone is going to turn in a no-deal mode, basically. To me, it is now becoming the most probable assumption. Sorry for being pessimistic.
Luc, do you want to react to that? I mean, that's in a way the interesting part of this webinar, is that we do have different views, and while we all have our own crystal ball, no one, I think, has the absolutely right one. We will see in 200 days where it went to. But Luc, I don't know if you wanted to add something, or whether I can I should, because the other question that maybe you can also react to is not only because the discussion won't be over with the trade deal. I mean, we also have to bear in mind that the withdrawal agreement contains some other provisions that needs to be implemented about leaving the union. So I think there is still a whole chapter of leaving the union that is also out there, and that will need to be implemented with financial questions, etc.
I think that my answer was mainly with regard to the timing. I think the timing would still be sufficient if there would be a willingness to come to an agreement to achieve that by basing yourself on what has been agreed in other free trade agreements. Michel speaks about, rightly so, about different approaches. And I think at the end of the day, it matters more to the United Kingdom, or the decision will be largely within the United Kingdom to decide how relevant a deal is for them. In general, I think that the European Union has also been interested in having a partnership agreement with the United Kingdom, but the relevance is of course less for the European Union than it is for the United Kingdom. I think the European Union is an important trading partner for the United Kingdom, and therefore, at the end of the day, it is for the United Kingdom to decide how important at this stage is an agreement with the European Union. If they come to the conclusion that they need this absolutely for economic reasons, then I think it's still achievable. On the other hand, again, I think the red line for the European Union is clearly that you cannot have the same access to the single market, you cannot have the same rights than other member states, because let us not forget also that this agreement needs to be approved and ratified by the parliaments of 27 member states, as it will exceed the areas in which the European Union has exclusive competence. So I think there will be a political debate also at the end of this year to assess the content of this agreement, and that is also something that should not be forgotten in the British debate. It's not only a negotiation between the UK government and the European Commission. There is a larger audience that has to take a decision at the end of the year. And finally, I would like to say, Michel spoke about Switzerland. I think it's an important aspect that we should not forget. The European Union has for many years embarked on negotiations with Switzerland for a comprehensive agreement, replacing the numerous bilateral agreements. And I think whatever the European Union would negotiate with the United Kingdom would also have an impact on other negotiations, including the one with Switzerland. And so I think these are additional difficulties that will have an impact on this negotiation, that will make it a little bit less easy for the European Union to compromise or to move ahead on some issues where the UK might think it's easy to come to a conclusion.
Michel, before you react, we have been getting some questions, and I will take those that fit with this, and particularly one has just been asked, which I think would be interesting to get your views on, both of you. And that is sort of the fact that one's been hearing in certain media that actually no negotiation will start before Germany takes over the presidency, and potentially Mr. Johnson is waiting for a discussion until Mrs. Merkel is in the seat of the presidency. Do you think that's a realistic scenario?
Not really. Of course, it is important that Germany takes the rotating presidency. It could have a sort of lead if there was any trend in moving Barnier's mandate, for example. It would probably be easier if Germany is a strong proponent for making the mandate evolve. But in many ways, the system is fixed. The system is there. There is a president of the European Council, whose job it is to make people come together. And in fact, since the last treaty reform, the rotating presidency has lost a little bit of its importance, because it's only really effective on sectorial meeting of ministers. But at European Council level, at Barnier's mandate level, I think it's not fundamental. I think the voice of Germany was there before and will be there after.
May I add, Michel, that I fully agree with what you just said, but we also have the European Parliament. And the European Parliament, which has gained in power over the past years, has also to give its approval to the outcome of these negotiations, to the treaty that will at the end be decided if there were to be an agreement. And so I think we should also not underestimate the main political forces within the European Parliament, which will carefully watch what will be given to a third country that the United Kingdom will be in the future.
Yes, I completely agree with this. Barnier is making a huge effort to keep the Parliament on board, and I think that's absolutely right. Ultimately, if there is a very low-key free trade agreement, you could even have, I mean, I go back on Luc's previous point that it will need to be ratified by all member states. If it is just a trade agreement of a low quality level, basically quick and dirty during the last semester, you may well have a case which is only between the Council and the Parliament without the member states. If it is pure trade, that would be the normal institutional end product, that it will be ratified by the Parliament and the Council. So the Parliament is certainly extremely important, and Barnier knows well, and the member states as well.
So, if I may, I mean, we all, in the beginning, in the introductions, mentioned COVID-19, and we have now managed to speak about Brexit, which has obviously also become a topic again. But does COVID-19 and the pandemic and also the economic consequences thereof have an impact on the negotiations, on the outcome, on the positions of the different parties, or is this not the case?
I think it will not have a major impact on the issues on the table. It has, in my view, two aspects. One is we lost some time because of COVID, and secondly, the member states of the European Union are now faced with different issues that probably will be their priority, and that is, of course, the economic situation, the increasing unemployment. So I think a lot of governments in the next few months will be focused on revitalizing, relaunching their economy, and Brexit is not certainly not their top priority. What the consequence of that will be on these negotiations, I'm not sure, but I think that as the national interest and the European Union interest will become stronger in order to make sure that the European economy works again, probably the willingness to compromise with the United Kingdom might become less big.
Yes, well, the COVID period has undoubtedly perturbed the transition period. And indeed the negotiation, as Luc mentioned at the beginning of this session. Is it a justification for an extension of the transition? It could be if there was political will for that, but there doesn't seem to be such a political will. What it seems is that for an ambitious agreement, we would probably need more time than the 200 days left. But in a way, as we sort of concluded, there will probably be no extension due to UK's internal politics. There are two other points. One is that the new post-COVID agreements is in a way a certain kind of no deal, of New Deal. It will imply some mutual financial solidarity to a point which we do not know yet exactly, but it will be probably also a further repulsive element for UK. They probably don't want to be mixed into this at all, and it may be an additional reason for not extending the transition period for them. And finally, as Luc mentioned, I think COVID has made Brexit a secondary priority for the EU and for the member states. I think the next summit, for example, is adamant to try and avoid being polluted by Brexit. They have other major items to discuss of a financial nature, the setup of the post-COVID fund. I mean, all this is becoming on the sort of front burner, and the Brexit, I think, has been already intellectually digested by most actors.
We have a question from the audience that says, does the COVID crisis actually show a union that hasn't worked? Or does it show a union that may not have worked in the beginning, but is now finding its way to support the common economies? And I think, Michel, you mentioned that already as an element, which I'm certain is also part of the way the UK is looking at the current.
Well, if I answer directly to this before Luc, I think one should never forget that to a large extent, if the European Union was viewed as absent in the COVID pandemic itself, it results directly from the fact that in the treaty, the European Union has almost no competence in the health field. Very limited to extremely sort of minute items, and indeed there has never been any proper coordination under the European Union banner. So what actually is now being done is that the EU is really sort of making the step on the consequences of COVID, not on health, on the health feed itself. That is going to be, or could be, another issue. Should there elements in the health sector which should be better treated at EU level? But that's a question for the future. Now, in the immediate consequences, economic consequences of the COVID issue, we see the European Union in action.
I fully agree with Michel. I think that's also when we discuss the future of Europe after the crisis. Thirdly, we need to draw the lessons of this, because people are often asking for more Europe if there is a crisis. And then when things go well again, they forget that Europe has an added value. And so I think when we one day redraft the treaty and the competences of the European Union, this is certainly an area where we noticed that a coordination or European competence would have been of an advantage. I think indeed the European Union now has a role to help rebuild the economy, and I think we have an experience in that, what we did after the 2008 financial crisis. I would only add to what he said, to what Michel said, that of course the European Union, at least within a certain number of countries, has a competence with regard to border questions, and that could have been, in my view, better coordinated. I was in charge in my former life as Minister of Justice also of Schengen areas, and you, Michel, of course know these questions very well from your time at the Commission. So probably there could have been room for improvement, but on the sanitary aspects, certainly health issues, the European Union did not have the power that some now ask the European Union should have had during the crisis. But the treaties are there to be respected, and there is nothing in the treaties about this, or not enough, and that is something we should think about for the future.
You will not be surprised to hear that we're getting a number of questions around financial services and what Brexit means and what the negotiations mean and the various scenarios that we've been talking about, deal and no deal mean for financial services. This is obviously crucial to a country like Luxembourg, where the financial services sector has a very strong role to play in the economy. So maybe this is a good time to look at that angle of the equation. And I don't know who wishes to start, Luc or Michel.
Well, I can try in a nutshell, because the United Kingdom also is the most important international financial services center on the European continent, and so the fact that the United Kingdom is leaving the European Union, of course, has an impact, and therefore I think some kind of partnership between London and the other financial centers on the continent, in my view, is important in order to make sure that financial stability is preserved. I think that can be preserved with or without a deal, but even better if there are some kind of arrangements in place. And without going in technical details, however, I think one has to say that the passporting rights that some financial institutions established in the UK can do business in the European Union, that of course is finished once the United Kingdom will have left with a no deal. I think it's also finished if there will be a deal, because the deal will never give the same passporting rights to the United Kingdom banks than it gives to the banks of the member states of the European Union. Now, this being said, the United Kingdom will be a third country, so it will be treated like other third countries that have a close financial services relationship with Europe, New York, Japan, other places. So in some areas, I think it will be possible for the Commission, under certain procedures, to judge that the laws of the United Kingdom are equivalent, and on the basis of that unilateral decision of the European Union on whether the laws of the United Kingdom are equivalent, some of the rights can be granted to UK financial services companies. But again, this is possible, provided the United Kingdom will commit not to change its rules in the future, because the European Union wants to make sure that, of course, the huge number of rules that have been set up, also after the financial crisis, will be respected in all the financial centers with which the European Union is dealing. So financial services, I think, will be a key element in this, although I think in the political declaration there's very little on financial services, and probably the equivalence assessment will be the only one that is that can be achieved by the end of this year, provided in a bigger political agreement that fits into it. Because at the end of the day, again, I stress that because I was there when these equivalence rules were envisaged for the first time, that was after financial crisis, it was always meant as a unilateral assessment by the European Union of foreign jurisdictions.
Yes, I fully agree. I mean, in an ideal world, at the time when UK had choices of models of leaving the European Union, for example, becoming a kind of EFTA country like Norway or other, one could imagine sort of mutual systems leading to the decision of equivalence for financial services. But on the trend they are now, which is to be fully sovereign, to alter their own internal supervisory rules or regulatory rule, I think there is absolutely no alternative than the unilateral equivalence being granted to UK as a third country, like the US or Australia or Japan. Now, what the UK is trying to do now is to shape this unilateral equivalence into a system which in fact would be as much mutual as possible in order to be as much predictable as possible. And I think the European Union will resist any dilution of this sort of unilateral equivalence, which has to remain the European Union competence. But that's an issue which is being discussed. But typically, UK is very interested in that topic and very much uninterested in others, whereas the EU says, no, pick and choose. And again, you see the sort of incompatible logic between the two.
There's another question around financial services that's been asked, which is, does the COVID-19 crisis, and this is maybe quite practical, but I think it's one that's come several times, does the COVID-19 crisis and the way that financial services have continued to be performed very much in a remote way, people teleworking, etc., does that give us any indication of how plans which were there for continuity, business continuity, would apply in relation to the planning that Brexit has also required from many of the financial institutions? So in other words, do we think that the fact that the financial services and the financial centers continued to perform during the times of crisis is a sign that maybe it won't be so bad, even if there is a no deal and there is no equivalence or anything like this?
I don't think there is a direct link here, because what we are dealing with in financial services is what will be the laws applicable to the various services that are or products that are provided. And I think the question is, will it be largely harmonized EU law on financial services, or will it be the UK law? And if the UK law diverges from the European Union law on financial services, I think then it will be very difficult to give access to the European Union to UK financial services company. And I think that this uncertainty that is created by this also within the coming 200 days, but also already during the past 4 years, explains why quite a number of UK financial services companies, asset managers and others have opted for establishing a strong foot in another financial services center in the European Union, Luxembourg being one of those that actually benefited unwillingly of this, because I think if you are outside, it will not be the same legal regime anymore as before. And I think this is a trend that, in my view, will continue to move on during the coming weeks and months, as this uncertainty will not be answered until the end of the transition period.
Yes, I fully agree. Unless, of course, in, say, September or October, everybody switches on a no-deal mode because it becomes obvious that there won't be any deal, or that the deal will be sufficiently low level that it will not allow for anything sort of grand in terms of financial services. I think in which case, as Luc said, many of those financial services which have not already reorganized themselves will start doing so.
Thank you. There are still questions coming in, but I'm afraid we're running out of time. So you can see people would have been listening to you for a bit longer, but we haven't allocated time. So maybe before I hand back to the chair of the BCC, I want to give the opportunity to both Luc and Michel to maybe summarize in 1 or 2 sentences, or just give their outlook after this really, really interesting talk and this great insights they shared with us. before we hand back.
Yeah, I think Brexit is an unprecedented event in European Union history. Let us not forget that it's the first time that somebody who was a member is leaving the European Union. They actually left, but what comes out of this leaving and what will be the future relationship still remains to a large extent uncertain. I think we always should aim at having a good relationship with our neighbors, and as a lawyer, I think that the best relationship is always if you have some kind of an agreement in which you write down what is your relationship and on what is it based. But of course, that needs to be a fair relationship. And I think you have to realize that the Treaty of the European Union gives to the member states a lot of rights and obligations, freedom of movement of people, goods, services, capital. If you're outside, you cannot have the same. It is within this limit that you realize that the third country is never to be the same than a member state, that an agreement should be found. If it cannot be found, and I think I'm a little bit more optimistic than Michel on this, if it is to be found, I think it cannot be extremely ambitious, because otherwise it might not come through the parliamentary approval process in the 27 member states. But we should aim at building a bridge toward the United Kingdom, especially also in financial services, where I think there's a lot of know-how and the history that London has that is worthwhile to some extent keeping, while at the same time Europe will move ahead and needs to move ahead to integrate further, because most of the challenges, climate, economy, security, are cross-border issues where the European Union has a huge added value in my view. Thank you.
Yes, very, very quickly, Steve. Well, one thing is, if at the time of the referendum, many people in the UK sort of conservative side was saying basically, we are pioneers and many will follow suit. What we see now is that absolutely nobody is tempted by the UK separation from the EU. On the contrary, there are countries which are waiting for accession to the European Union. So we are dealing with Brexit with a kind of anomaly. Whatever happens with the existing negotiation, let's not forget that, as you mentioned, Steve, there is a withdrawal agreement which is still to be fully implemented, with the huge issue of Northern Ireland border still quite imprecise, and for which there will be probably further discussion going on between now and December. And in many ways, on financial services, I think there is no doubt, Luc is right, London will remain London as a financial center in a different format, but certainly the power and the knowledge is there, and we will have to deal with London even from a practical point of view, even if there is no deal in the first place.
Thank you so much to both of you. I'm afraid we have to bring this to a close at this stage. That was, I think, very, very interesting and very insightful debate and discussion. And I hand back to Dan.
Well, thank you very much, Luc, Michel. Thank you very much for having accepted to share with us your perspective and experience on this topic of Brexit and the days and months ahead. It's really been very, very interesting to listen to both of you. As you surely imagine, Brexit is a very important topic for all of our members of the British Chamber of Commerce, and I think the discussion that both of you had today together with Steve is surely helping them to enrich the way they look at the issues that are at stake. Allow me also to thank you, Steve. Thank you very much, Steve, for moderating this event in a very, very knowledgeable way. I think really it has also enriched the experience for all of us. Thanks to you, to Clifford Chance. Thanks to your team and to the team at the British Chamber of Commerce for having organized this. And thanks to all of you out there in the internet world for having participated in this. It's been a really success because we had full house. Although we're in the virtual world, we had 100 registrations, which is a full house for us on this Zoom event. So thanks a lot to all of you as well for participating in this event. Maybe just let me attract your attention to the next event we're going to have. It's going to be on June the 17th. It's going to be our People in Leadership group who's going to organize a webinar on the question of leadership in times of crisis. The good, the bad, and the ugly. That as well, I think, interesting topic. I'm sure we're going to have lots of interesting insights. Thanks again to all of you, all of the people on the floor, also to the people who have participated. So thank you very much. Have a great day and talk soon. Bye-bye.